Okay, so we're back at the main homepage, and we're going to talk a little bit about Pixlr Editor. And that's really the meat and potatoes of this Pixlr photo editing website. And this is going to be the one that is most like Photoshop. And it's going to be the one that you're going to want to use the most if you're trying to get into Photoshop or trying to get into some advanced photo editing. So all we need to do is click on the Pixlr Editor, and it brings us to this next screen. Now, this is the opening or the welcome page, and again, it looks a little bit different than it did the last time, or it did the time even before that in Pixlr-o-matic. But what this is really, this is just asking if we want to create a new image. So instead of always having to import in an image like we've done in both Editor and O-matic, this will allow us to create a blank canvas that we can add images to if we want to. We can also open an image from the computer and from a URL, same as before. Now this one at the bottom, the Open Image From Library, is one of the reasons that you would want to actually sign up for a Pixlr account. And the reason for that is, once you sign up for a Pixlr account, they give you an amount of storage space that you can have. So you can save images and Pixlr files straight to the cloud in their Pixlr account. The other thing that you can do is you can link Facebook accounts, you can link Flickr accounts, and these would let you upload images that you have on those services straight into Pixlr, edit them, and save them straight back or straight to Pixlr's cloud service. So that can be really handy. So you don't necessarily have to sign up for the service, but that might be nice if you think you would be using that a lot. Okay, so I'm just going to open an image from my computer, and we'll start, and we'll see how this interface all works. Alright, so you can see what happens when we open this image. We go into this UI. Now, if you're used to working in Photoshop, this should actually look pretty similar to you. In a lot of ways, they take a lot of inspiration from the UI of Photoshop. But again, they're going to not dumb this down, but sort of simplify everything so that you don't have as many options as you would in Photoshop. So that means that we're not going to get a lot of the really advanced features in Photoshop, but it also means that for the majority of stuff that you're going to do inside a image editor, those things are going to be easier to find and easier to handle than it would be something with Photoshop. It has so many options and panels and buttons and everything. So I'm just going to go through some of this UI for just a second, just so that we can get a handle on it. This main image viewer in the center is where our panel is open. I can move this around because I can open multiple panels of this with multiple different pictures in them. Off here to the left-hand side is all the tools that we're going to use to select and move and copy and do things like that to our actual image. Then up here at the top we have a bunch of different options for adjustments and filters. This is where we'll go to save and do adjustments to the image, add filters, and sort of arrange our UI also in this view option. Then over here on the right hand side we have our three panels. Now in Photoshop you have multiple panels that's off here on the right hand side. You can customize and you can do all those things. In Pixlr you only have these three. These are the only three that are available to you. The first one is the navigator, and so what that is basically that's the same thing that was in Express before. You would use this to zoom in and out, and then you can move this red square around to view different parts of the picture as you're zoomed in. Alright, so I'm going to put that back so I can see the whole thing. Alright, the second one after that is your Layers panel, and we'll go further into Layers panel in a minute, but I just want you to know that that is there, and that's where we'll be doing all of our layers. And down here we have the History panel, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. Once we start doing some transformations to this image, it'll be a little bit easier to explain. But basically it's like a dynamic undo, where we can undo and see exactly what we've been doing to this image since we started. Okay, if you ever accidentally close one of these, you might think, oh my god, now where is it gone? All you'd have to do is go up to View, and then we can see all of these different options that we have here. So my tool options, those are the ones off on the left-hand side, and the one that we've gotten rid of was History. So all I do, click that back, it pops right back in. Okay, so let's start doing some stuff to this stag beetle. What I have here is one single image. It's called a background image. When I bring in an image into Pixlr, it automatically locks that layer so that I can't do anything to it. So I can't move this image around. I could, add some stuff on top of it and things, but I really want to crop this and do some things like that. So the first thing that we need to do is unlock this layer. So you can see I'm in the layers panel. I have my it's called background. That's what it's automatically defaulted to be called. And then it has this little lock icon off to the side. And you can see how when I just hover over the top of like an icon like this, it brings up this little yellow dialog box. And what that says is double click to unlock layer. So what that is kind of a little helpful tool tips that Pixlr is going to give you when you hover over an icon. So that's what we want to do. We want to double click this to unlock the layer so we can start manipulating it. So I'm going to double click that, and you can see that it now changes from a little lock to a little check mark. Okay, that check mark is also my visibility for that layer. So right now it's checked to on. If I click it again, that layer disappears. Now it doesn't erase it or anything like that, it just makes it visible or not visible. So I have this layer now. One of the things that's really important as you start getting deeper into image manipulation is you're going to be getting a lot of these different layers. And you want to be able to name those layers so we can easily jump back and forth between them without being confused and just having layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, and that's how it'll name them. So if we want to rename this layer, all I have to do is double click on it, and I'm going to name this Stag Beetle. Okay, so that's how we would rename our layer. So now that this layer is unlocked, you can see that I have my main selection tool, the move tool, grabbed up here at the top, and I can move this around now on my canvas. Because really this back area where it has these checkerboard pattern, that's my canvas that I now have an image on. So I can move it to different sides. I could bring in other images. I could give this background a color if I wanted to. But for right now, the first thing that I want to do to this image is I want to straighten it. Because he seems like sort of at sort of an angle here, and I want to be able to straighten him on there and get him presentable for what we're going to do. So you've seen how I can click and drag and move this guy around. But if I want to maybe make this image smaller, or I want to keep it from being crooked like that, I want to rotate it something, we need to be able to get those handlers that we had off onto the side like we did in the other programs. Okay, so that's really easy. All we have to do is go up to Edit. We can hit Free Transform. Now what Free Transform does is it gives me these handles off to the side. Now if I hold down the Shift key and I manipulate this handle and I click and drag it in, it'll keep it from squishing or squashing my picture. I wouldn't want that, he's a bug. Now if I wanted to rotate this, like we wanted to because we want to straighten him in the image, all I'd have to do is see how my icon of my cursor changes. As I go from the edge here, that says, push up, so that's going to scale it. But as I go out farther, it turns to a rotate handle. And that's where I can rotate him so that I can get him more on a straight line. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. Now once I'm done, all I have to do is hit Enter. Okay. Great, I got him more centered in the center. Now the problem is, now we have some of this background showing. Our canvas is showing through, and I don't want that. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to crop this guy. So how we can do that is off into the side where the Tools panel is, there's one called Crop. If we click on that, you can see that a lot of my options for this tool show up in what I call the context-sensitive bar. Now this context-sensitive bar, how I mean that is, you can see that any time that I change from any of these different tools, these options change up here at the top. So it's always context-sensitive. So when I choose the crop tool, it gives me the options for the crop tool. Now you can see also that when I go back onto my canvas, my icon has changed. It gives me that little crosshair, and then it has the little icon for the crop tool next to it. So what I'm just going to do is I'm going to drag a marquee around this guy. I'm going to use the Free Transform handles to make sure that I get right to the edge. Right to the edge of this. Okay. So once we're done, and I have him exactly how I want to crop him, I'm going to just press the Enter key. And we have our Stag Beetle nice and cropped here. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is how we would add text to this. So down here on the left-hand side, at the very bottom, or towards the bottom, I have a Type tool. Now when I select the Type tool, I can come over here and it gives me a new icon for my cursor. It looks like the little brackets. And wherever I click, it's going to open up a new text box. Now, this text box is not exactly how Photoshop or Illustrator works. You're not going to be typing directly onto the page. You're going to be typing in this text editor. So I'm going to write stag beetle. And then you can see that it gives me a couple little options for this. The font, these are fonts not that Pixlr has given you, like it was in the Express that we talked about before, but these are actual fonts that are saved onto your computer. So you'll have to think about that as you choose them. So I'm going to scroll down and pick Arial. Now, certain fonts will have a style associated with them. Not all of them, but this one does. It has a regular, a bold, and an italic, and a bold italic. So I'm going to use bold. And this is also where I can choose the size. So if I decide I want to make this a little bit bigger because it's my headline, I'm going to blow that up to 65. Now the really cool thing about the text editor is actually this color chooser. If I decided I wanted to do a color other than black, I can just click on this color selector and it gives me lots of different options. The first one is this color chooser where I can rotate this around, and this will give me all the different colors in the HSL rainbow, and it also lets me do then shades and tints and tones of that color. I can also put in RGB values and look at web safe colors. The really neat thing about this, though, is the IMG section of this. And what this does is it takes lots of different colors from my image and gives me a choice. So these are colors exactly from my image that it's picked up. Some of these bright oranges and stuff I think is from this this color down here. But what's really nice about this is, let's say I could make this stag beetle lettering just black. But it might be kind of nice for the design of the piece if maybe it was a color that sort of was in the actual picture itself. So like maybe one of these dark browns. So I'm going to choose one of these dark browns, whichever I think one might look good. I'm going to choose that one. And you can see that it's giving me a bunch over here. And I'll hit OK. So now we have this stag beetle wording as part of our image. Now before, when we were using Express, all we could do is once that stag beetle lettering was on there, we wouldn't be able to move it again. It was sort of stuck in that one space, flattened down. What's nice about Editor is that that has now been made into an extra layer. You can see that it automatically made me a text layer up here, and it's called stag beetle, whatever was written in here. So this is separate now from my stag beetle that's my actual image. You can see that the icons are different. So now, if I go back to my main move tool, and I have the stag beetle lettering selected, I can move that around and place that wherever I want. It's separate from my stag beetle. Now these layers, they have a hierarchy to them. So which means whatever is on top is what's going to show up at the very front of my page, and whatever below that is going to go below it. So you can see if I drag and I drop this below the stag beetle image, now I can't see that anymore. That's because it's behind my image. See how it's behind there? Right? So we don't want that. We want that to be on top. So I need to click and drag this layering up on top of there. So that's how all of those layers will work. So now that we've got some lettering on here, and we have our stag beetle sort of rotated exactly how we want him, I'm going to bring in a new image. So what's great about these more advanced image manipulators like Photoshop or Pixlr is we can start adding in images together and collage something, which would be much more useful in a lot of ways as opposed to just taking one image and doing adjustments to it. So right now I'm just going to go to File and Open, and I'm going to open a new image for us. Okay, so I've found this arrow just by doing a Google search, and I saved the JPEG of it, and I want to be able to add this arrow to this image of my stag beetle. I want to be able to point out some certain parts of it as if this was a biology lesson. So you can see now that because I have the arrow's image selected, my layers off here to the right hand side have changed. They no longer have my stag beetle, my lettering, and things like that. It's back to the background with the locked layer because this is the one we're working at at the time. See, it's up front. It's the one I have selected. So if we want to take this image and add it to our stag beetle canvas, all we have to do is that we have to unlock this layer, because again, we can't move it around or we can't do anything to it while it's locked. So double click on that padlock icon to unlock it. And then all we're going to do is we're going to drag this layer from the layers panel, and we're going to drop it onto our stag beetle image. And you can see what's happened is it's added a new layer to our layers panel. It's just layer 10 copy. I'm going to double click on it and name it arrow. And now this arrow is on top of here, so we can start manipulating this and changing this. This is obviously way too big. So what I want to do is I want to be able to free transform that. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller and rotate it and move it around, because I'm going to talk about these giant jaws he has. Okay, so once I have that exactly how I want it, I'm going to hit enter. Now the problem with this is, you can see how this has a big white box around it. And it's kind of, you know, I mean, that looks fine, but I want to be able to remove that white box so that it looks a little bit nicer. So this is where we're going to start getting into some of our selection tools. So just so that I can see this a little bit better, I'm going to zoom in, move this over. So this is our arrow that we have selected. What I want to do is I'm going to be able to get rid of some of this white area around this. Now how I can do that, there's a couple different ways. But the way I'm going to show you the most is by this lasso tool. Now you can see when I click on the lasso tool, my context sensitive bar changes, and up here at the top there's two icons. There's one with sort of a round lasso tool, and one with sort of more of an angular one. This freehand lasso tool will let me make a selection with just using my hand freehand as if I was drawing, and it's going to select whatever I've drawn. Now that one can sometimes be a little hard to use because drawing with a mouse is awkward. But so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the polygonal lasso tool. So I'll just click over to that one. And what that lets me do is it lets me, wherever I click, it's going to then add a line to that. And it's going to let me select by just making points around this. And what I'm going to do is basically I'm going to try to cut this arrow out. So you can see I'm just adding points all along the edge. You can see now I have a selection just around that arrow. So now that I've made a selection around this arrow, I want to get rid of this white around the edge. So the problem with that is if I hit delete, it deletes out my arrow. That's not what I want. I want the opposite of that. I'm just going to undo that really quick. So what's nice about these image manipulators is I can add masks to this. Now how I would add a mask is I'm up here in the arrow layer. You can see that my selection is around the arrow. That's what I want to keep. That's what I want to show. But I want everything else to be gone. So all I have to do is go over to this layers panel, and with my arrow layer selected, there's a little button down here that looks like a circle inside of a square, and that's to add a layer mask. So all I have to do is click that layer mask, and you can see it's masked away everything that wasn't selected by my selection tool. So now if I go up and I select this guy, I can move this around, and now it looks like a nice cutout arrow. Okay, I told you I was going to get back to this history panel, and that's what I'm going to do right now. This history panel off to the right hand side, like I said before, it works like a dynamic undo. So we still have undo. If I go up to the top, I can go Control Z or just undo, and I could keep doing that if I wanted to undo what we were doing to that arrow, right? But you can see how over in this history panel, everything that I've done to this image from the very beginning, from the instant that I opened it, is showing up in this history panel. So if I know that I want to get to past the part where I added a layer mask and I started to select this with my lasso tool, I can go right up here and just click on the free transform part. See, now all of these manipulations that I've done are gone. They're grayed out because I'm back to this point in my process of working with this image. Now let's say I don't like that. I can keep selecting through here and move forward or backward within that timeline. So this is a really helpful thing when you want to jump to different places in where you've been working with this image. So there are lots of different options and lots of different tools inside of Pixlr, and I would suggest going through and playing with these and seeing which ones are going to help you best with your photos. I'm not going to go through every single one because I don't want this tutorial to last 3 hours. But one more that I'm going to do, which is a little bit more of an advanced feature inside of Pixlr, but I think really helpful, is something called the clone tool. Now the clone tool is really big in Photoshop, and they've also had it as a big part of Pixlr Editor. And what this clone stamp tool will do is it's going to help us get rid of this really unsightly date down here at the bottom. God, I hate those on pictures. I don't know why we need that anymore, but this one has it. So what we want to be able to do is just get rid of this picture and add this texture that's in the background on top of it. Okay, so how do we do that? It's really pretty simple, actually. What we need to do first is go over to this layers panel and make sure that we're working on the stag beetle image layer, because that's where this image is, or that's where this date is, and that's what we want to get rid of. The second thing we're going to do, we're going to select the clone stamp tool. So once you have that selected, you can see that we're given some different options up here in the context sensitive bar, and you can see that our icon for our cursor has changed again. It's sort of a circle with a little crosshair in the center. Now, if I just start trying to use that and paint on here, it gives me a little warning. And it says you can't use the clone stamp tool because you haven't determined a clone point yet, or a source point. You need to controlled click to define a source point. Now, what's a source point? Well, what that is we're going to paint over the top of this from another piece of our picture. So I'm going to choose that over here. So I'm going to hold down Control, and you can see that that changes my icon to definitely a little crosshair. And I'm just going to click once somewhere over here on the left-hand side. You'll see why in a second. So then I'm going to let go of that Control button. So I'm just going to go over here to the date, and I'm going to click and drag and just start painting over the top of this. And you can see where I'm painting is actually from where this original, where I control clicked over here, where that original cursor was, that's where it's painting from. Now you can see where this would start getting bad. If I start going up here to where his leg is, you can see that I'm just like adding in a big part of extra leg now. You can see where it's cloning from where I'm drawing from. So that's not what we want. I'm going to control undo that. But you can see how that's really nice that we can easily paint this out if we have a texture that we can work with. So if you have something that's in the grass or in the clouds or something like that, you can easily remove those types of things with the clone stamp tool. So the last thing I'm going to talk about is just a couple things that I'm not going to go very in-depth with, but just to let you know where these things are and kind of how they work. So up here at the top, you can see that we have a lot of things for adjustments and filters. A lot of those are the same things that we've been looking at throughout these three different editors. So the very first one where we had Pixlr-o-matic, and then the Express, and now then the editor, a lot of those same things are here. So adding blurs or adding adjustments like messing with the colors or adding overlays to these things, everything is here. They're just not as laid out and in easily accessible ways. They're more just written here off to the side. But that's where you would go, the filter adjustments, things like that. That's where you would go to do all those. Now over here in the view panel, we also have that full screen mode, and that's what I would really suggest using when you're inside this program. That'll keep you from hitting these back buttons and backing out of everything and losing all your work, which it will do. That's one of the unfortunate things about working in a web-based program. You still have your browser options that are still there, as opposed to, let's say, just a normal software on your computer. We also have lots of different languages that we can choose from, and there is a help function. So that's really nice for this web-based program. If you have any questions or you need to go through anything, they have an FAQ and a help section. Okay, so let's say I have my image exactly how I want it. We're ready to go. I'm going to file and save this. So there's a couple different options for how you can save this, and I'm going to go into those right now. So if you go to File, Save, it's going to bring up this dialog box. And this is where it's going to say, okay, where do you want to save this to? Now the default is your computer. Basically you're saving it straight back to your hard drive somewhere, maybe on your desktop. And what's nice about this is it gives you a few different choices for what format this is going to be. Now there's not nearly as many choices as Photoshop is going to give you, but it gives you a few good ones. And what's nice too is it gives you these little explanations of what type of file might be best for yours. So you can see that it gives me JPEG, okay, so that's good for most photos. A PNG, that'd be good if I had transparency, like if I wanted some of that back canvas showing and just have that transparent. BMP, large but non-destructive, which means it's going to be a full-size file, which is a big file, but it's going to keep everything. It's not going to compress anything. And then we have TIFFs, but the one I wanted you to look at most is this one called PXD. That's the layered Pixlr image. I think they kind of ripped it off of a PSD, which is a Photoshop document. What this is, if I ever want to come back and have all of my layers preserved, like let's say I've been working on the stag beetle, yeah, I like the way that it is now, but I gotta go off and do something else and I want to come back to this. What you should do is you should save it as a PXD file. So that's going to be bigger because it has to keep all of your layers and everything, and you're not going to be able to upload a PXD file to the web or anything like that. This is your source file that you'll use inside of Pixlr when you open it back up. It's going to keep all your layers, it's going to keep everything the way that you had it so you can come back to it and work on it again. So I'm going to save that as the PXD. But I wanted you to notice too, also off here to the left hand side, I can also save this image straight to Facebook if I wanted, or that Pixlr library I was talking about, which is sort of their cloud saving service. There's also Flickr, Picasa, any of those that you have linked to your Pixlr account, we can save automatically to those. So I can open them up, let's say I had an account from Picasa, open it up straight from Picasa, work on it in Pixlr, save it straight to Facebook. You can see how that would be a really cool and convenient way to edit pictures and move them around online. Okay, so I'm just going to say my computer, I'm going to say OK, it's going to ask me where I want to save that. And that's it. My image is saved. I can come back to this because it is a PXD file, and I can work on it some more. So now you have a basic overview of the different levels of Pixlr, the different complexities that they have in each of their editors, and hopefully you can start getting into image manipulation in a more advanced way, and you can get through Pixlr, and once you start running out of options in Pixlr, or you start saying, God, I really wish I could do this one extra thing or something, that's where you can start moving into Photoshop. So this is a good beginner step for anyone ready to get into photo manipulation.